Tonight, let us enter winter slowly, not through the front gate of history, not by way of a king's decree or a famous battle, but through the thin grey breath of an ordinary evening in Victorian England, when frost gathers first on the rails, then on the window glass, then finally, somewhere inside the bones. The hour is late enough for the city to soften, and early enough that its fires are still trying to prove themselves. Above the rooftops, the sky hangs low and colourless, and the chimneys give off those reluctant threads of smoke that look less like confidence than habit. Everything seems to exhale: the brick terraces, the narrow courts, the horse in the yard, the woman carrying a basket beneath her arm, all of them sending small white clouds into the dark, as if the entire country has agreed to become visible only through breath. You begin, as many people did, in a room that never truly forgot the weather outside. The blankets are heavy, but not gentle. The mattress has its own opinions, somewhere beneath it, or within it, or perhaps only in the imagination of the cold. There is the faint rustle of straw and old newspaper, whatever has been tucked there to interrupt the climb of frost from floor to bed. The hearth still glows, but only just. A few coals sit at the grate like stubborn stars that have not yet accepted morning. They give light more than heat. The air carries that familiar winter mixture of soot, wool, and iron damp, and on the washstand a bowl of water has filmed over with ice so thin it would feel rude to break it. You stand there for a moment, beneath the faint window light, aware of your own bare feet on the boards, aware of the way cold rises in a room, not dramatically but patiently, like a thing that knows it has all night. There is comfort though, small comfort, practical comfort, the kind that asks for no speeches. A coat drying near the chair, a scarf slung over the bedpost, a kettle that might be persuaded to life in a winter like this. Safety is not the absence of discomfort, it is the presence of sequence. First the stockings, then the shirt, then the waistcoat, then the coat. First the coal scuttle, then the poker, then the match. First the hands around a cup, then the first swallow, then the return of feeling to the fingers. People survived not because the cold was kind, but because habit was warmer than panic. The smallest routine became a form of shelter outside the frosted pane. The world waits in softened outlines. A milk cart passes with the dull music of harness, leather and wheel rim over frozen grit. Somewhere farther down the street, a door shuts with more force than necessary. Somewhere else someone coughs the kind of cough that has spent half the winter collecting itself. And above it all hangs that Victorian stillness, which is never true silence, only the muffling effect of snow, smoke, wool, distance and fatigue. If you listen long enough, the city reveals itself in layers. A far bell, a nearer footstep, the faint hiss of gas, the brief shake of a window as wind noses through the frame. It is not a dead world, it is merely keeping its voice low, so let us keep ours low as well. Let us not hurry the night or demand too much from it. We have a long walk ahead of us, and it will be enough to notice what rises gently into view. The brittle lace of frost at the edge of the glass, the pale moon snagged in chimney smoke, the last coal settling with a sigh. Somewhere beyond this little room, winter has already taken hold of the lanes, the river, the markets, the stations, the hearths above stairs and below them, but for a moment longer remain here, where the cold is held at bay not by victory, but by companionship with ordinary things. A chair, a blanket, a cup, a fire with only a little life left in it, and still enough life to begin. When at last you open the door, the cold arrives honestly. It does not creep or negotiate, it places one gloved hand against your face, and lets you know exactly where you stand. The step is slick with old snow, the kind that has frozen, thawed, and frozen again, until it resembles badly laid stone. Across the narrow street, the opposite row of houses rises in dark, soot-blunted lines, their roofs dusted white, their chimneys breathing uneasily into the slate sky. The gas lamps have not yet surrendered, their yellow light floats in weak halos, staining the snow below them, the colour of old paper. A horse moves past with the sort of offended dignity only winter can produce, steam lifting from its nostrils. Behind it, a man in a cap walks with his shoulders high, and his hands hidden deep in his sleeves, carrying on with the business of being alive, because there is very little alternative. The streets of a Victorian winter morning are never empty. They are simply restrained. A woman drags a basket over the cobbles, pausing once to shift her grip. A boy with red ears and a coat too thin for the season darts between two carts, nearly slipping and recovering with the bruised pride of the practised poor. From the corner comes the sweet, smoky smell of roasted chestnuts, and for a breath or two the whole street feels almost generous. Then the wind turns and brings coal smoke with it, and damp wool, and the sour trace of yesterday's slush, and London remembers itself. Nothing here is pure for long, even whiteness comes pre-shadowed. You walk because everyone walks. This is a city that asks movement from nearly all of its inhabitants. Movement to market, to factory, to workshop, to service door, to station, to school if one is lucky, to labour if one is not. Snow does not stop that motion, it only makes it audible. Boots press and crunch, wheels grind and complain, shovels scrape a path before stoops that will be covered again by noon. Even the shopkeepers who have not yet opened are present in little signals. A blind lifts behind a pane, a bolt is drawn, a broom appears in a doorway and pushes the night's residue into the street, where it joins everything else that winter has failed to erase. For those who can afford it, the cold remains outdoors as long as possible. But in working streets, outside and inside are only cousins. When you step back through another narrow doorway and into another modest room, you feel not relief exactly, but a thinning of the assault. Here the fire is fuller, though not by much. Someone has coaxed a little more life from the grate, and a kettle hums on the hob with the self-importance of something genuinely useful. The walls are cracked, the window rattles. Damp has made a vague map of itself in one corner. Yet the room contains what matters: a stool dragged close to the hearth, a pot that may become supper, socks set to dry, a loaf under cloth, a cup being passed from one pair of hands to another. This is not warmth in the luxurious sense. It is warmth rationed into gestures. There is a particular dignity in such rooms that no brochure and no nostalgic painting ever gets right. Not prettiness, not quaintness, dignity, the mended curtain, the carefully folded apron, the child instructed to sit nearer the fire, but not too near, the father knocking the coal dust from his cuffs before he sits, the mother stretching onion, barley and hope into something that can be called a meal if spoken kindly. Everything is arranged around endurance. The home becomes less a refuge from winter than a workshop for surviving it. Here one learns the economy of comfort, how long to keep the oven hot after bread is out, how to wedge cloth beneath a door, how to save ash for the step, how to wrap a warm brick for the bed, how to make tea leaves do one more round than seems reasonable. And because the body cannot bear unbroken hardship for long, the mind learns to anchor itself in tiny certainties. The scrape of spoon against a cup, the window widening at the corners, the low family murmur before the day fully separates everyone. The half-minute when both hands are wrapped around something hot and the whole world narrows to that one understandable fact. These are the early shelters of the night and morning, the little protected spaces to which we will keep returning. Because the streets will grow larger and darker, the city will widen. We will pass beneath fog and over river ice, and beside institutions built from hunger and discipline. But whenever the air grows too sharp, remember this room, its weak fire, its useful kettle, its damp walls, and the way ordinary people managed to make a life from conditions that never once apologized. As the day lifts itself by degrees, the city begins to blur. This is one of winter's cleverest tricks in Victorian England. Just when the eye expects clarity, fog comes down and rearranges the streets into suggestions. It pools first where the lanes narrow and the air already smells of soot. Then it slips outward, wrapping the lampposts, swallowing the far end of alleys, turning every coach light into a floating idea. Gaslight and fog were made for one another in the most dangerous way. The lamps stain the mist with tired gold, enough to promise visibility, never enough to grant it. Ahead of you, a figure appears whole for 1 second and then dissolves into the grey, as if the city has changed its mind. The people of these streets are easiest to read by outline. Shawls pulled high around cheeks, reddened by wind, greatcoats swinging just above slush, hats rimmed with frost, muffs clasped against the chest like portable rooms. A servant girl, in clogs with her sleeves, rolled despite the cold. A clerk with his collar up, trying to look more prosperous than warm. A widow in black moving, carefully, all edges and restraint. Clothing in winter says everything, and conceals nothing. It tells you who may ride, and who must walk, who owns fur, and who inherits flannel, who can treat the weather as an inconvenience, and who must bargain with it each hour. There is something theatrical about all of it, and yet most performances are written by necessity. The poor wear layers of whatever can be found, an old military coat over a labourer's shirt, a child's shawl pinned into a scarf, newspaper tucked between lining and body, extra stockings pulled over hands to serve as mittens. The middling classes prefer order, trying to keep their garments aligned with dignity, even while their toes go numb. The wealthy possess the kind of winter clothing that pretends not to acknowledge winter at all. Fur at the cuff, velvet at the collar, leather gloves that fit like confidence, and still everyone shivers, though some do it privately and others in public. You pass a tailor's window where mannequins pose in seasonable elegance, untouched by mud, unaware of chimneys, perfectly indifferent to the fact that garments are only as warm as the rooms into which they return. Nearby, a vendor cries scarves and caps in a voice already frayed by cold. He thrusts a pair of patched mittens toward a passerby, then pulls them back before the damp can steal their shape. He is selling insulation, but also optimism, and optimism is harder to keep dry. Down the street, a child stomps her feet in boots that have known 2 previous owners. She laughs in a burst of white breath with a friend whose nose is running and whose fingers are bare. The body adjusts where fashion will not, yet the fog is the true master of the hour. It enters the story of every passer-by. It settles in velvet folds and on ragged hems. It beads on whiskers and bonnet ribbons. It makes horses loom larger, houses lonelier, corners more mysterious than they deserve to be. A lamplighter at the edge of Sue. The square extinguishes one globe after another, with the practised motion of a man shortening the night's sentence. Dim, move on, twist, dim, move on. There is a rhythm to him that borders on prayer, not because he is devout, but because repetition is one of the few human answers to weather. If you stand still long enough, The whole district becomes a study in partial revelation. A butcher swats at a dog and vanishes into steam. A grocer arranges winter apples that shine dimly through mist. Somewhere above, a shutter bangs and is hurriedly pulled in. Somewhere below, in basement kitchens and cellar workshops, coal is being shoveled, knives honed, dough kneaded, boots repaired, coal buckets lifted by hands that will smell of iron all day. This is one of the secrets of the city. Fog may hide forms, but it cannot hide labour. Labour announces itself through sound. Smell and movement and winter sharpens all three. So as the streets disappear and reappear around you, let them do so slowly. Let the fog leave some things uncertain. Not every corner needs an explanation. Not every face needs a full biography. In sleep stories, as in winter, suggestion often travels farther than fact. It is enough to know that under the mists move thousands of lives, each wrapped in cloth, duty, and private discomfort, each carrying some version of warmth in hope, memory, or lunch tin. We will not follow all of them, only enough to feel the city breathe. Soon your eye is drawn upward, where the rooftops grow steep, and the chimney pots stand close together like a forest of blackened fingers. Winter reveals how many mouths a city possesses. Every hearth wants feeding, every grate wants drawing, every flue wants clearing, before smoke turns murderously inward. And so there are children on the roofs, not all at once, not lined up for your convenience, but here and there, in glimpses. A slight shape against the pale, a soot-dark cap, a hand-gripping brick, the quick bend of a back as a brush is worked through a narrow throat of stone. The chimney sweep belongs to winter more than to any season. In summer he is labour, in winter he is necessity. From the lane below, the work looks almost unreal, like some grim nursery tale in which boys are taught to climb houses instead of trees. Yet, the reality is more ordinary than fantasy, and therefore harsher. Their boots slip, their fingers crack, their lungs learn too early what soot is. The masters shout upward, the brushes rasp, ash drifts down and settles on snow that has already lost its innocence. One small figure emerges from behind a stack of flues, kneels, coughs into his sleeve, then disappears again as if the roof itself has swallowed him. The city depends on such vanishings, and rarely asks what they cost. When you turn away from the rooftops, hunger is waiting at street level. Hunger always is. It forms queues before kitchens and tempers, before shops, and long careful silences inside homes, where the broth has been stretched, one ladle too far. In winter, food changes character. It ceases to be flavour first and becomes heat, density, continuation. A crust warm from an oven can feel like mercy. A potato in the pocket is not merely lunch, but a temporary stove. The smell of soup, even bad soup, can summon a line before the pot is fully set on the range. Here, in a narrow street behind the market, a charitable kitchen has opened its shutters to a queue of shoulders and bowls. The steam from within clouds the doorway, making the place seem richer than it is. Inside, there will be broth the colour of weather, thickened with barley if fortune has visited, scented with cabbage, because cabbage is loyal, when few other things are. Each person who steps forward carries not just a vessel, but a degree of restraint. No one wants to look desperate. Desperation, like cold, is tolerated more easily in others than in oneself. Yet the hands clutching the bowls are red and rough, and the faces are arranged in that expression winter teaches so well, patience pressed flat over need. A child near the back of the line leans against a wall and watches the steam with the kind of concentration other children reserve for puppets or fireworks. Somewhere farther on, a man sells roasted chestnuts over a brazier that also serves as his own hand warmer. At another corner, stale bread is discounted with the solemnity of a state proclamation. A woman argues the price of onions, not because pennies are abstractly valuable, but because each one has already been promised to rent, coal, soap, or thread. This is the arithmetic of winter, not large decisions, but constant subtraction. And yet, because a human mind cannot stay forever in want without inventing small pleasures, odd little sweetnesses persist. Peppermint, toffee, a mug of tea so strong it tastes nearly of iron. A pie of suspicious contents, eaten too fast, because the hands cannot hold its heat for long. Even at the edge of poverty, there is appetite for delight, though delight must usually arrive wrapped in paper and cost very little. That is another thing winter teaches. The scale of joy shrinks and becomes more exact. One hot chestnut, one buttered corner of bread, one spoonful richer than the rest. If the street has grown heavy, let it soften here for a moment. Imagine the bowl at last in your hands. Imagine the first mouthful travelling through the body like a slow lantern. Imagine a wall at your back, a little steam before your face, and no demand more complicated than swallowing while it is still warm. We will need this pause. The city ahead contains harder institutions and colder ideas. But before we reach them, let the body be reminded that survival is sometimes no grander than broth, fire, and the brief easing of a clenched stomach. Not every gift of winter is kind, but some are undeniably strange. There are years, in memory and rumour and occasional astonishment, when the river hardens enough to invite the city onto its back. Then the Thames, normally all current and labour and black moving purpose, becomes briefly theatrical. The ice takes on stalls and footsteps and laughter. Fires are lit where boats should be. Printers set up presses where barges might have passed. Children slide, dogs bark, hawkers improvise, and the whole improbable fair spreads across the frozen water with the confidence of an event that knows it cannot last. You descend toward the river through streets already talking about it. Men claim the ice will hold an elephant. Women say it held one once. Boys say they crossed earlier and heard it sing beneath them. Such stories grow in cold air, but that does not make them false, only well clothed. When you step out at last and see the broad grey sheet carrying tents, smoke, and moving figures, disbelief seems less useful than participation. The world is already absurd. Better to walk gently onto it and see what it has made possible. There is a different quality to sound on frozen water. Every footfall feels both near and hollow. Laughter travels. A fiddle does its best against the wind. Somewhere a mug is knocked over and skids farther than seems proper. Vendors call hot gin, pies, prints, sweetmeats, souvenirs. The smoke from little fires goes straight sideways, thin and urgent. Faces glow, not with ease, but with defiance. That may be the truest warmth of such fairs, not comfort, defiance. The public decision to make spectacle out of danger, fellowship out of weather, commerce out of hazard. The ice may crack tomorrow, therefore one sells buns today. If you move slowly through the crowd, you see how winter briefly levels and resorts people. Apprentices stand beside clerks, ladies peer from safer edges, labourers stamp their feet near the fires. Children belong to no class for 5 minutes when they are sliding too fast to remember one. A printer offers souvenir cards announcing that they were purchased on the frozen river itself, as if paper could capture disbelief. A pie is handed to you from a stall whose owner keeps blowing into his fingers between sales. It's hotter than expected, heavier than necessary, and entirely welcome. But no matter how lovely the fare, winter sleep content knows when to step back from excitement. So let us take only what we need from the ice, a little wonder, a little brightness, a little proof that hard seasons do not forbid delight. Then let us leave the open river and make for walls again, because the body prefers warmth in rooms, and the mind, after marvel, often seeks enclosure. The townhouse that receives you from the cold is not yours, nor mine, nor perhaps morally uncomplicated, but it is warm, in the way only serious money can arrange warm. The hall is lit before you fully enter. The air smells faintly of polish, lamp oil, lavender, and coal burned without panic. A servant takes a coat already colder than the room deserves. Somewhere above, laughter rounds the landing and disappears. The parlour beyond glows in layered gold. Fire in the grate, lamps at the side tables, candles near the piano. Reflections laid carefully into mirror glass, so that even shadows appear intentional. Inside, winter is no longer an opponent, but an aesthetic. Curtains are thick, rugs soften the floor. Tea waits on a polished tray beside little cakes that could not possibly satisfy hunger, but are not meant to. Their purpose is gentler, to accompany conversation, to prove refinement, to allow fingers to linger around porcelain. Women sit near the fire in silk that would be foolish outdoors and entirely correct here. Men loosen into chairs while maintaining the sort of posture that suggests even relaxation has rules. Music begins from the corner. Someone turns a page. Someone else offers a remark about the weather, with the satisfaction of a person who will not have to carry coal afterward. It would be easy to resent such rooms, and perhaps some part of the city does. Yet for our purposes, let the parlour serve as a resting place in the narrative. The rich had their rituals of insulation, just as the poor had theirs. Only the materials differed. Here safety comes cushioned and ornamented. There it came in patched wool and close stools. But in both cases, the human longing beneath remains surprisingly similar. To gather, to thaw, to extend the evening by making a small ring of certainty against the dark. Stay only a little while, long enough to hear the piano settle into the room, long enough to feel how the fire reaches even the toes, long enough to watch the window glass grow opaque with the difference between worlds. Outside is frost and soot and work. Inside is light, measured to flatter. Both belong to Victorian winter. Both will return. And when one has stayed too long in either, the other begins to seem like a dream. When you step back into the street, the city's voice returns before its shape does. This may be the truest transition in winter London. Not from warmth to cold, though that is immediate enough, but from curated interior sound to the rough music of public need. Street cries lift through fog in uneven ribbons, muffins, hot eels, matches, chestnuts, coal, watercress. The words change by district and hour, yet the principle remains the same. In a city too large to know itself by face, people announce themselves by sound. Each cellar makes a small argument against invisibility. A girl with a basket of matches calls out in a tone too bright for the weather, as if cheerfulness itself might increase sales. A man with roasted potatoes has turned his trade into a chant, the last word dropping each time like a lid. Another voice farther off is less melodic, more worn, simply repeating the fact of what he has in hopes that repetition may one day become abundance. Between them, all drifts the thin music of an organ grinder and the more honest clatter of cartwheels. The street does not compose a symphony exactly. It improvises one from appetite, hustle, cold lungs, and the need to be noticed. You follow the sounds toward a station where the city gathers itself into iron. Railway terminals in winter carry their own weather. Steam hangs below the roof like a second ceiling. The platforms smell of metal, wet wool, cinders, impatience and tea gone tannic in travel mugs. Third-class passengers wait, with the expression people wear, when they have paid not for comfort, but for continuation. They crowd around trunks, baskets, children, parcels, and one another. Each open carriage door exhales cold from within, because the train may move people, but it does very little to improve their temperature. When you find a place on a wooden bench seat, you discover a particular kind of community known only to the underheated. No one is cheerful, no one is especially talkative, yet shoulders lean in the same direction, knees make allowances for bundles. Someone produces a crust, someone else a bottle. A mother adjusts a shawl over a sleeping child, and a stranger shifts just enough to help without naming it help. Outside the window, gaslights slide by in soft yellow streaks. Then warehouses, then the backs of houses, then stretches where fog and smoke decide the scenery between them. The motion of a train in such conditions is surprisingly suited to sleep storytelling, not because it is comfortable, but because it repeats itself. Rattle, sway, settle, rattle, sway, settle. The mind loosens under rhythm, even while the fingers stay numb. You begin to understand how travel can be exhausting and soothing at once. The body never stops bracing. The thoughts, however, start to drift. When you descend again into another quarter of the city, the night feels lower, as though the railway has set you down closer to the underlayer of things. A narrow lane leads to a gate, the gate to a stair, the stair to a passage where brick shines with moisture, and every sound seems to belong to something hidden. Here the rat-catcher works, not as a villain, though he would look well cast as one, but as another winter labourer, whose profession only appears grotesque because it deals honestly with what the rest of the city pretends not to house. Rats live where warmth, crumbs, and darkness meet. Victorian London provided all three in admirable supply. Below the street, the lantern light is the colour of old butter, and hardly more convincing. Water moves in one channel with slow dirty intent. The walls arch overhead, sweating mineral cold. Somewhere ahead comes the scratch of claws, or the scrape of metal, or both. The man beside you mutters about nests, drains, and bold ones that bite. He says it the way a gardener might talk of slugs, professional irritation. Not horror to survive a city fully. One must develop such tones. Otherwise, everything would be unbearable all the time. What matters to us here is not gore, nor the catalogue of filth, but the reminder that winter pushes all creatures toward one another's heat. Rats toward cellars, people toward fires, disease toward crowding, commerce toward stations, sleep toward stories. The underground only makes visible the bargains already being struck above. And because we have gone low and damp and close enough now, let us rise again before the air becomes too thick in the chest. The city above may be cruel, but at least it contains stars of gaslight, windows, and the occasional human face. Up here, there are only lanterns, brick, and the persistent knowledge that even darkness needs workers. Above ground once more, you turn west towards spectacle. This is another mercy of long cities. One may leave behind drains and emerge, after enough walking, into velvet. The theatre stands ahead with its facade lit against the dark, like a promise that someone has taken the trouble to gild. Carriages queue in a sort of practised confusion. Lanterns sway, cloaks descend from steps. Footmen close doors with small final flourishes, and all the while the cold keeps needling every exposed inch of skin, reminding all present that elegance is often only discomfort, arranged beautifully. Inside, everything changes scale. The entry glows, the stair rails gleam under many hands. Perfume and damp wool strike a temporary truce in the corridors. Above the crush of voices hangs the warm pressure of gaslight, that Victorian triumph which illuminated faces more generously than it spared lungs. You find your place high enough to look down over the better seats and see the whole room as one living ornament. Boxes lined with silk and jewels, stalls filled with coats and opera glasses, galleries loud with boys, and clerks who paid for distance and got it. The curtain waits in folds, heavy enough to suggest that what lies behind it must matter, and then for a while it does. The hero enters to applause, the villain to suspicion, the heroine to a hush, half sincere and half social. There are speeches larger than ordinary weather. There are painted interiors grander than most actual homes. There are lamps disguised as moonlight, tempests constructed from sheet metal, sobs timed precisely to music, and moments when a whole room of unrelated people leans forward together because the make-believe has become briefly stronger than the draft under the door. It is easy to laugh at melodrama from a distance. It is harder when you are cold and tired and have paid real money for a place in a heated room. Then art need not be subtle. It need only be warmer than the street. But the theatre's gift is temporary by nature. Every curtain must fall. Every crowd must shuffle back into weather. Outside afterward, the cold feels sharper for the contrast, as if winter resents being ignored for 2 hours and returns with renewed professionalism. The street beyond the playhouse is darker now, the lamps more isolated, the fog more intimate. Laughter spills from stage doors and carriage windows for a little way, then thins. You continue east again, toward a place where performance has no use, and warmth is given only under terms. The workhouse never needs much description to announce itself. It is one of those buildings that seem to have been designed by a committee of shut doors. High walls, narrow windows, brick as statement, iron as punctuation. Even when snow has gentled its outlines, the moral intent remains visible. Here, relief is offered in a shape calculated to wound pride. Here shelter is made conditional on obedience, separation, routine, and the surrender of any pleasant illusion one may still possess about society's tenderness. A small line waits at the entrance, though waiting may be too active a word. They stand, they endure near the possibility of admission. A woman with a child held close inside her shawl, an old man whose hands cannot stay still even when the rest of him has given up movement. A younger labourer, trying and failing to look like someone who only stopped by to inquire. Winter strips the theatre from most lives, but it leaves a little of it here. Everyone at the gate performs dignity. Everyone pretends there remains some room to choose. When the door opens, it opens only enough. A voice, a number, a pause, then movement from the fortunate or desperate few, and the sagging stillness of those left out. There are few sounds sadder than resignation in cold air. It makes almost none. Snow receives it, brick keeps it. The line rearranges itself into separate miseries and drifts back toward the night. We will not go deep inside. Sleep stories need not drag every corridor into view. It is enough to understand the principle: thin meals, hard discipline, bodies sorted, families split, assistance converted into deterrent. The workhouse belongs to that long Victorian habit of confusing punishment with moral instruction. Yet even here, I suspect, there were corners of human softness, no policy intended. A nurse folding a blanket, better than required. A crust saved. A whispered word before lights out. Systems are harsh. People inside them are more mixed. That is why history remains worth walking through, instead of merely condemning from afar. The cold outside the gate feels almost cleaner after those walls. Not kinder, but less judgmental. Snow lands on rich coat and poor cap with equal composure. Wind asks no one for references, and because the heart tires when pressed too long against institutions of shame, Let us move on before the building fixes itself too firmly in the mind. Ahead there are still children, lanterns, windows, remedies, and that thin silver thread of human warmth, which keeps appearing exactly where the official record least expects it. The children of winter do not always appear where one expects them, not lined up for pity, not arranged beneath a single charitable lamp, but glimpsed in fragments. A pair of boys crouched beside a bakery vent, palms open to stolen warmth. A girl under an archway with a basket of flowers no season should have allowed. A thin figure asleep among crates, wrapped in something that might once have been a curtain. Another darting through a crowd with the speed of practice and the ethics of necessity. Victorian cities produce such childhoods the way chimneys produce soot. Constantly, regrettably, and in quantities polite society preferred to describe rather than solve. You take care in following them with the imagination, not to turn them into emblems alone. They were children before they were symbols. They laughed, stole, lied, coughed, dreamed, swore, traded, clung, boasted, and made up games no reformer ever thought to record. Around a barrel fire at the edge of a yard, half a dozen of them huddle close enough to seem one creature with many elbows. One has wrapped his feet in rags, one has newspaper stuffed beneath her dress, one keeps telling a story about a dog clever enough to open a butcher's latch. The others listen as if the tale itself were fuel in long winters. Stories are often the first thing people learn to burn without losing them. A little farther on, a wall bears notices for missing children. Names, ages, caps, last seen near such and such market, such and such crossing, such and such station. The paper curls in damp at the corners, snow gathers in the grooves of the pasted layers. Every city develops an unofficial geography of absence. Not just where people live, but where they disappear. Winter extends those maps. It covers tracks too quickly, keeps witnesses indoors, makes every alley more negotiable for danger. And then, as if the night senses the need for a steadier presence, the watchman appears. His lantern comes first, rocking through the fog in a slow golden arc. Then the rest of him resolves around it. Thick coat, stiff gait, scarf high around the jaw, the small wooden rattle at his belt, the club in his hand, mostly for ceremony and confidence. He is not a policeman in the grand modern sense. He is something older and more humble, a man whose duty consists largely of remaining visible while others sleep. He checks doors, notes windows, glances into corners, pauses at strange shapes in the gutter long enough to determine whether they are sacks, drunks, or the barely living. His power is modest, his usefulness too, yet there is comfort in the existence of such men, precisely because they do not represent miracles. Only presence when he calls the hour. The words drift down the lane with unexpected gentleness. All's well. That phrase has never been entirely true in any city, but perhaps its purpose was never accuracy. Perhaps it was enough that someone had spoken into the dark and claimed the street as inhabited. A child behind a curtain lifts a hand to the glass. The watchman lifts his lantern a little in reply, and moves on. That small exchange may be one of the purest forms of winter reassurance. Not rescue, recognition. Follow him for a while. Let his pace steady the story. Past shuttered shops, past a cooper's yard, past a bootmaker's door, not fully latched, past lodgings where argument seeps through walls, thin as old promises, past a church whose stones hold cold, better than doctrine. In his company, the city becomes less dramatic and more survivable. Hazards remain. He simply measures them in manageable pieces. This loose board, that broken gutter, that man who will freeze if left exactly where he lies. That alley where the lamp has gone out and needs reporting. So much of civilization, you realize, depends on such plain noticing. By the time you leave him, another kind of light has begun to appear. Not dawn, softer than that, domestic light, window light, the kind that leaks through curtains and gathers under doors and turns whole streets into a gallery of other people's nearness. It is Christmas Eve in one district, or near enough to it that holly has been pinned above mantles and oranges hung to dry by the stove. Through one broad pane you see a table being laid, through another a pudding brought in steaming like a small weather system of its own. Somewhere, perhaps just beyond sight, someone is telling a ghost story, because winter and haunting have always shared a border. You do not need to enter to feel the warmth. Sometimes the gentlest return to safety is to remain outside and witness it. A family gathered near the hearth, a child too excited to sit still, a woman lifting a kettle, a man half asleep in a chair, pipe lowered, face released from the labour of public expression. A wreath no richer than ivy and red ribbon, and yet enough. Victorian Christmas did not belong equally to all, but neither did it belong only to the fortunate. The season moved through the city in gradients, roast goose in one house, a borrowed candle in another, a church hymn in the lane, a crust, an apple, a ribbon saved from last year. Hope, like coal, could be poor quality and still burn. Rest here a little in the sight of lit windows, in the knowledge that even for those who stand outside them, warmth can travel by imagination. It is not a complete comfort. It will not keep fingers from cracking or rent from coming due. But in long narratives, as in long winters, one survives partly by borrowing light where one finds it. Later, when the street has quieted enough that each cough can be heard as its own biography, you find yourself thinking about illness. Winter has a way of turning the body into a series of negotiations. The throat asks for heat, the nose for relief, the chest for one full easy breath. In Victorian England, this produced not only suffering, but industry. The chemist's shelves glowed all season with bottled confidence. Syrups for the lungs, powders for catarrh, lozenges for hoarseness, drops for agitation, tonics for whatever ailment could be made to sound Latin enough to justify a label. Inside one such shop, the air is thick with camphor, licorice, eucalyptus, stale wood, and the medicinal optimism of substances willing to be swallowed before being understood. Glass catches the lamplight in green and amber rows. Mortars sit ready on the counter like small stone altars to trial and error. Behind them, the chemist himself looks half priest, half shopkeeper, and entirely unconvinced by the miracles printed on his own stock. Yet people come. Of course they do. Winter leaves little room for purism. If onion boiled in milk has helped one aunt, it may help another. If a flannel wrap, mustard plaster, hot gin, clove syrup, or sleeping draught has calmed the night once, then it becomes part of the season's unofficial handbook. Some remedies comfort by chemistry, others by ceremony. A spoon, a steaming cup, a cloth wrung hot and laid across the chest, feet drawn close to the grate, the first easing of a blocked nose after a lozenge strong enough to clear memory itself. In such moments cure and care blur usefully together. That may be one reason winter remedies persist even when their logic wavers. Bodies are difficult, but rituals are repeatable. A family can gather around repeatable things. When you leave the chemist, the city greets you by the nose before the eye. Snow has not cleaned it, merely rearranged it. Here comes horse. Warm and emphatic. Here coal smoke, metallic and bitter at the edges. Here fish from a cart that should have sold faster. Here bread from a bakery vent. And for 3 blessed steps it overrules everything. Then the wind shifts and delivers ash, sewage, wet leather, old cabbage, brewing beer, damp wool, hot iron, and the peculiar vinegar shame of a public urinal, half frozen in its cast iron dignity. Victorian urban winter is a lesson in layered atmosphere. If the sights come to you in fog, the smells arrive without apology. Street sweepers push their brooms through slush already defeated by the scale of the task. Carts spill straw. Horses contribute continuously. Coal dust settles on fresh snow and turns it grey before it has learned to sparkle. Yet within this assault lie occasional mercies, almost delicate enough to miss. Soot from an upper laundry line, lavender from a shawl chest just opened, orange peel discarded near a kitchen door, cinnamon from a pudding house. These notes do not conquer the city, they simply interrupt it. Sometimes that is enough to change a walk, because the middle of a long sleep script must learn how to breathe more slowly. Let the narrative widen now. Let the streets thin, let the houses give way in stages to yards, then hedges, then open ground. North of the denser wards, beyond the more talkative chimneys. The air cools into something cleaner and lonelier. The road roughens, frost hardens in the ditch grass, bare trees stand apart instead of crowding. Ahead, the moor begins not with drama, but with subtraction. Fewer lamps, fewer voices, fewer walls, to hold the wind back from itself. Out here, winter loses its urban manners. There is no market cry to soften it. No lamp reflected in fog, no passing carriage to remind you that other lives are near. The moor keeps its own company. Stone walls half sunk in frost. Heather gone dark under snow. A ruined farmhouse with one side still standing and the rest surrendered to weather and ivy. The land seems to breathe more deeply than the city, but not more kindly. On the moor, indifference is the local custom. A shepherd might nod in passing. A dog might bark once and decide you are not its business. Otherwise, the landscape offers no commentary. This is where Victorian imagination placed many of its quieter fears. Not because ghosts require open country, but because open country gives thought too much room. In a city, the mind is jostled on the moor. It hears itself. Every broken wall suggests a family once was. Every path that disappears into whiteness suggests a mistake someone made in weather exactly like this. Yet there is solace here too, especially for a tired listener. No one is selling anything. No institution rises to judge. No queue forms. The wind and the frost and the land itself reduce life to elemental scale. Breath, step, coat, sky. Sometimes after too much soot and sorrow, that simplicity feels almost medicinal. So stand a moment on the ridge and look back. The city is only a smear of amber on the horizon, a rumour of lamps beyond the dark. Before you, the moor stretches on under a moon blurred thin by cloud. The silence is not complete. Winter never allows that. Grass whispers under crusted ice. A bird startles up from unseen shelter. Somewhere far off, a gate knocks, but compared with the city, it is nearly holy in its restraint. Hold to that feeling. We will need it for the place ahead, where silence lives indoors and warmth does not guarantee peace. At the edge between country quiet and urban return sits the asylum, or whatever name the institution prefers for itself this decade. Its brick walls are darker than the snow deserves. Tall windows reflect almost nothing. A lamp burns above the entrance with a steady efficiency that feels less welcoming than administrative. The place is heated, yes, but many Victorian institutions discovered early that warmth alone could not create kindness. Inside, the corridors hold a complicated smell, made by carbolic old linen, boiled starch, coal heat, fatigue, and the unspoken fact that many lives have been made smaller here. A nurse at the desk looks up, decides you are neither emergency nor authority, and returns to her papers with the practiced resignation of someone who has learned to save reaction for actual disaster. Down the hall, a pair of orderlies guide a man whose slippers scuff the tiles in a rhythm more exhausted than resistant. A woman hums in a room beyond sight. Another voice laughs once, briefly, almost merrily, and then stops in a way that makes the silence afterward seem the more unnatural. Victorian medicine, especially where the mind was concerned, loved certainty more than it deserved. Winter, admissions rose. Diagnosis thickened, restraint. Sedation, routine, and moral instruction all took their turn pretending to be cures. Yet even here, as in the workhouse and the railway carriage and the soot-black street, one suspects the truth was mixed. Some came because there was nowhere else warm to place them, some because families ran out of patience, means, or courage, some because grief had become unmanageable, some because an illness of the mind is still an illness, however crude the century's vocabulary for it. The asylum belonged partly to fear, partly to reform, partly to neglect, partly to care. Human institutions rarely choose only one motive when several are available. We do not stay long, this night is already full, and the script must be careful not to grow too hard in the middle. So leave the corridors to their murmurs, and step back outside where the cold, for all its bite, at least feels honest. Snow drifts against the low wall. Somewhere inside the building, a window is cracked for air, and from it slips a faint ribbon of warmer breath into the dark. It dissolves at once. Even so, the sight comforts. Life inside institutions has a way of seeming abstract until you notice its breath. As you walk back toward the waking city, another figure enters the narrative with a much gentler purpose. She carries no clipboard, no diagnosis, no sermon, only a long stick and a memorized route. The knocker-up is already at work before the sky has chosen a colour. She moves from window to window, with the concentration of a craftsperson. Tap, pause, tap again, a curtain shifts above. Somewhere a hand lifts in acknowledgement. A factory clock may rule the hour, but it is this woman in the street who delivers it to sleeping flesh. There is something deeply tender in professions that exist because human beings fail to wake on time. Alarm clocks were expensive, unreliable, or not yet trusted. Neighbours could be paid a few coins each week to become the hinge between night and labour. And so she goes on, past houses where men rise for the yard, past lodgings where seamstresses turn in their sleep for 1 minute longer, past workshops that will soon smell of steam and grease and leather. Winter has no mercy for latecomers. She, perhaps, has just enough. The city around her is not yet fully morning, which makes room for another kind of strange warmth. Amusements before daylight. In a small yard behind a school wall, children gather around a magic lantern operator whose box glows like captured honey. He hangs a sheet, adjusts a lens, and suddenly there on the cloth appears a skeleton chasing a pie thief, or a ghost peering over a wash basin, or some other cheerful moral absurdity fit for a century that loved instruction best when sugar-coated with nonsense. The children howl, cough, lean in, point, repeat the punchlines before he does. Their boots are wet, their cuffs are frayed, their delight is complete. Nearby, another boy offers peak-box views of battles, ships, criminals, queens, or sea monsters, painted by a hand not paid enough for perspective. A girl sells penny horrors printed so cheaply the ink comes off on thumbs. Murder, monsters, revenge, miracles, haunted lanes, wicked barbers, talking ravens. The world condensed into halfpenny doses and carried in a stack beneath the arm. It would be easy to dismiss these things as low entertainment, and perhaps they were. But low entertainment can be high shelter. A cheap scare is still a break from real ones. So let the script soften here. Let the middle become less idea-heavy, more image-rich, exactly as sleep content asks. Picture the lantern glow on cold faces, the little cloud each child exhales when laughing, the operator warming his hands above the lamp. Housing between scenes. The knocker-up turning the corner at the far end of the street, while behind her the city begins to answer. Tap, laugh, cough, footstep, cart, another window light. These are the sounds of endurance, moving gently toward dawn. When the children scatter and the sheet is folded away, day has almost admitted itself. Not brightly, Victorian mornings rarely make a show of it, but the darkness has loosened, rooflines separate from sky. Shop fronts begin to reclaim their shapes. In another half hour the market will open its throat and call in the crowds. We may as well drift that way now, while the city is still rubbing its eyes. Morning enters the market square by accumulation rather than arrival. First a shutter lifts, then a cart rolls in, then someone coughs over a brazier, then another seller spreads cloth over a table, and begins arranging goods that look resigned to the weather already. Soon the whole place is in motion. Turnips, onions, carrots with all ambition frozen out of them, bread hard enough to require argument, fish laid upon fresh ice in a city already full of its own, bundles of second-hand, clothing hung from hooks where they sway like ghosts, looking for improved circumstances. Markets in winter are wonderfully poor at pretending. They are not places of leisure, they are places of inventory meeting, urgency. Coins are counted twice, prices are questioned with religious intensity. Buyers squeeze, sniff, weigh, hesitate, then circle back after a lap meant to create bargaining power. Sellers exaggerate quality, because quality itself is in short supply. A woman holds up a pot with a crack, and swears it only leaks if filled in a rude mood. A man offers a wool coat that still, according to him, carries the smell of a gentleman, though whether that recommends or warns is unclear. Another sells sweets so hard they might also serve as masonry. Children orbit every stall like practical satellites, measuring gaps in attention. This too is part of the sleep-content goal you wanted to use, repetitive human systems. Markets soothe when described at the right speed, because everyone understands their rhythms. Arrange, call, haggle, rap, carry, repeat. Winter only slows the gestures a little and makes each one more visible in breath and steam. A chestnut seller turns his pan, a newspaper boy shouts a headline larger than fact. A baker cuts yesterday's loaf into this morning's bargain. A sweet woman slips a peppermint to a child when the mother is looking elsewhere. Nothing here is grand, everything is alive as the square grows fuller. The city begins to sort itself by destination. Servants buy early before houses stir upstairs. Labourers take whatever can be eaten one-handed. Women compare the price of cabbage against coal and coal, against soap and soap, against the impossible hope of not needing more thread. Herc buys gloves he cannot quite afford because cold hands advertise weakness in an office. A pair of boys stare at meat pies with reverence bordering on theology. Snow begins again, lightly, and no one leaves. They simply adjust hats, shoulders, canvas covers, and expectations. Victorian winter does not cancel commerce. It merely makes every transaction feel slightly heroic. From the square, the streets narrow again into rookeries and courts, where whole families wake inside rooms, smaller than many modern cupboards. Laundry lines cross overhead, steam leaks from cracks that have learned to be useful. At a wall warmed by a hidden pipe, children already gather. Palms turn toward masonry, as though praying to infrastructure. Their mothers bang rugs, wipe windows, stir porridge, scold, laugh once, then remember the time. A man shaves in a broken mirror, while his breath clouds the glass. Another shoulders a coal sack and limps into the lane with a tune too soft to identify. Somewhere, a baby cries with the full moral authority of infancy. Somewhere else, somebody is still asleep, and the whole building seems to resent it. Rookeries are easy to describe cruelly, and not difficult to describe accurately. They were crowded, damp, disease-friendly, and deeply unfair. They were also, however, communities held together by 1,000 exchanges too humble for reform pamphlets. A match borrowed, a child watched, a pail shared, a crust traded, a joke carried over the landing, a warning shouted down the stair. The same walls that trapped smell and cough also trapped familiarity. This is important for the script's emotional truth. Misery does not erase social life. It compresses it. At the end of one lane, a man ladles penny porridge into bowls. The line before him moves with the solemn order of a ritual repeated too often to require discussion. Steam rises, oats settle, spoons knock against enamel. One boy receives his bowl and holds it with both hands, eyes fixed, as if concentration alone will preserve the heat. He disappears around a corner and is lost at once among brick, laundry, and human need. If you wanted a single image for Victorian endurance, that might do. A child carrying breakfast through a winter alley, as carefully as if it were treasure. And still, the narrative must keep returning to safety. So notice also the small domestic signs: bread smell escaping a doorway, a cat asleep on a crate near a bakery wall, the first sunlight, weak but undeniable, catching on frost at the edge of a gutter, the way one woman, pausing with her basket, tilts her face up for a second, as if remembering that sky exists above smoke. No, the rookeries are not warm, but they are not featureless either. Light reaches them eventually, even if only in scraps, beyond the denser courts. Another morning unfolds behind cleaner windows. Here, the brick is scrubbed more often, the iron railings less bent, the stoops more carefully swept of snow before anyone important descends them. Yet winter has not been defeated in these streets, it has merely been outsourced. Fires are already burning in the breakfast rooms because someone in the basement rose early to light them. Water is warming because someone carried it. Sheets were aired because someone opened them to cold and then fetched them back in. Comfort in these houses travels upward by invisible labour. If you slip down one of the side passages between two terraces, the whole architecture class reveals its backstage: coal chutes, service doors, yards paved in stone so cold they ring under the heel, lines of washing stiff as boards, kitchen windows fogged from within. The scent here is richer and more honest than in the drawing room. Yeast, onion soap, dripping ash. There is also hurry. No one below stairs can afford the elegant slowness practiced above them. A kitchen maid warms her hands over the range only until the cook turns. A scullery boy hauls water with the concentration of someone calculating exactly how many journeys remain before his shoulders begin to complain. A housemaid carries linens up while another brings ash down. And yes, bounty. Their roots cross like threads in a loom, weaving the illusion that the house simply wakes itself. This is one of winter's most revealing lessons. Warmth is never abstract. It has a chain of custody. Someone split the coal. Someone paid the dealer. Someone lugged the scuttle. Someone blacked the grate. Someone risked singed knuckles with the warming pan before bed. Someone else, very likely, slept in a room far colder than the one they prepared for their employer. We speak often of cosy Victorian interiors as if coziness were a decorating style. In truth, it was a labour system with velvet curtains. Yet even downstairs, even where fingers chap an apron sour with steam, there are pockets of safe return. A mug stood briefly near the range, a heel of bread eaten in 2 bites, A maid who, finding 1 minute unwatched, drops into a chair by the kitchen fire with her eyes closed and her hands out. A joke exchanged over potatoes, the cook pretending not to notice. These are not luxuries, but they matter, they restore scale. Without them, the narrative would harden too completely, and hard stories make poor cradles. We want softness where truth permits it, and downstairs lie, for all its burden, contains softness in stolen doses. Above, breakfast is a quieter ceremony, newspapers folded, silver warmed by use, if not by temperature, a gentleman at table with his cuffs intact and his worldview largely untroubled by coal prices, a lady considering whether the drawing room ought to be rearranged to better catch the winter light. Their world is not false, exactly, it simply rests upon a hidden flaw. When the maid places the tea and withdraws, she leaves no trace except the possibility of more comfort. Such was the ambition of good service, to erase the labour while preserving the effects. Walk back out to the front street and watch this social machine meet the weather. A private carriage waits with its horse, sending up generous plumes. A merchant steps in without hurry, gloves new, boots dry. At almost the same moment, around the corner, a servant boy empties a bucket into the gutter, wipes his hands on his coat, and returns to a basement where the day's second fire is already needed. Winter falls on both households, warmth does not, and still, there is no need to turn this into a lecture. Sleep scripts must notice without prosecuting every paragraph. Let the contrast sit quietly, and do its work. One window displays breakfast china, another, around the back, reveals a maid half asleep, with a potato peeler still in her hand. One chimney sends up clean smoke, another coughs. One room waits for music after supper, another for mending after midnight. The city contains both and calls itself normal. As the sun climbs no higher than politeness requires, these separate worlds continue side by side. Offices fill, kitchens thicken with steam, schools gather children whose cuffs are no match for the playground frost. Factories begin their long day, parlours prepare for callers, wash lines harden and then soften, the market empties and refills. The river moves under whatever ice remains. Somewhere a watchman goes off duty, somewhere a knocker-up finally sleeps, somewhere a child from the barrel fire last night is already back in the street, having carried morning farther than many adults. We have walked nearly the whole breadth of this winter now. We have seen the city from grate to rooftop, from theatre curtain to workhouse gate, from market stall to moor, and because a long sleep narrative must know how to gather itself before release, let us begin doing so now, not by summarizing too sharply, never that, but by allowing the sights we have carried to drift back past us in a slower order, like windows glimpsed from a train on the return journey. The useful thing about morning, even a Victorian morning, is that it refuses to complete the night too neatly. Light enters, yes, but not as judgment and not as cure. It enters as continuation. Snow on the sill becomes water. Frost on the rail becomes shine. Chimneys that looked spectral before dawn become merely overwork. People who seemed ghostly in gaslight become again what they always were. Tired, practical, underdressed, overburdened, intermittently cheerful. This is perhaps the most important reveal of the whole walk. Winter did not turn people into symbols. It kept them human under pressure. So sit now, if only in the mind, on a bench in a small square where the paving stones are damp with thaw and the trees wear no leaves with which to flatter themselves. Nearby, a bakery sends out one kind wave of warm air each time the door opens. Across from it, a chemist polishes his glass, preparing once more to sell hope by the ounce. A dog noses yesterday's crust from a drain. A nurse crosses the square with quick steps. Two apprentices argue about whether the frost will return tonight, as if their opinions can influence it. A crow lands on a chimney pot and gives one severe call, as though taking attendance for the day. From here, the city may be watched without being chased. That is another form of safety, not to be enclosed, not to be heated past thought, but simply to be still while the world continues its patterned labour around you. The milk cart comes back on another route. A servant girl hurries with a basket, then slows to retie a shoe. A boy in a cap reads last night's broadside aloud to a friend who cannot read, but can laugh in the right places. Steam rises from grates in the road. Laundry, taken in too stiff, is shaken and rehung. Somewhere a church bell marks an hour no one needed explained. The city is not transformed by daylight. It is translated. This slower vantage lets the earlier images return in gentler shape. The frozen bowl in the dim room, the chestnut smoke at the corner, the lamplighter lowering each night's small sun, the child on the roof among the chimneys, the queue with its bowls and lowered eyes, the ice fair with laughter laid over danger, the parlour that borrowed comfort from hidden hands, the train compartment full of tired knees, the rat catcher's lantern below the street, the theatre curtain lifting like collective relief, the workhouse door opening too little, the children at the barrel fire, the watchman's quiet call, the Christmas window glowing through cold glass, the chemist's bottled confidence, the moor's broad indifference, the asylum's stale heat, the tapping cane at the windows before dawn, the lantern show making monsters harmless for half a penny, the market bargaining against hunger, the rookery wall leaking warmth enough for little hands. Notice how they no longer strike in the same way. When first encountered, each carried its own demand. Pay attention, fear this, admire that, grieve here, rest now. But in recollection, they begin to mingle into one larger impression, not of misery alone and not of charm alone. Something more useful. A sense of how entire populations move through cold, by means both material and emotional. Fire, yes. Food, yes. Layers, wages, transport, architecture, institutions. But also joke, routine, song, spectacle, witness, patience, and the odd human willingness to keep passing warmth onward, even when one has very little to spare. This is where sleep content finds one of its richest seams. Not in sensational hardship, though hardship supplies contrast. Not in cosy imagery alone, though coziness supplies rest. The real gold lies in the rhythm between them. The fire after the street, the tea after the station, the lantern after the alley, the song after the queue, the window after the workhouse gate, the hand at the grate after the moor. The body will listen longer when the story understands expenditure and return. Victorian winter, for all its cruelties, offers this pattern abundantly. A hard surface, a soft answer, not enough, yet enough to go on. And perhaps that is why the age continues to haunt the modern imagination. Not because it was prettier than ours, often it was filthier, hungrier, colder, and far more unjust in its arrangements, but because its winter life makes visible things that many eras hide better. How heat is distributed, how labour disappears, how entertainment doubles as shelter, how the poor build comfort from repetition, how institutions speak of charity while practicing discipline, how children adapt faster than they should, how public space can become a soundscape of need, how private light can seem almost holy when seen from the street. Across the square, the bakery door opens again, the warm breath of yeast and oven reaches you, then is gone. It leaves behind, not disappointment, exactly, but a small lesson. Relief in winter is often intermittent. One does not hold it continuously. One receives it in draughts, a cup, a room, a laugh, a lull in the wind, a seat by the range, a sheet pulled high, a stranger making room on the train bench, a mother passing the largest potato to the smallest child, a servant stealing 1 minute by the kitchen fire. Such things do not solve an age. They do, however, carry a person through an hour, and many winters are survived hour by hour until spring arrives almost by administrative error. The day around you continues to clarify. School children appear in pairs and knots. Clerks increase. Deliveries thump. Somewhere a piano lesson begins with scales sturdy enough to survive the weather. Somewhere else a chimney sweep is called again. The same city that offered frost fairs and ghost stories will, by afternoon, return to soot, wages, slush, and all the ordinary frictions of inequality. Nothing has been healed. That is not our ending. Our ending must be truer and softer than healing. It must be permission, so remain on the bench a little longer. Let the square move. Without requiring your opinion, let the cold touch the edge of your coat, but not demand that you rise. Let memory and weather settle into one another until the whole night we have walked begins to feel less like a sequence of scenes and more like one continuous breath, taken slowly through old London and let out again into morning. If you keep sitting there, the city begins to reveal one final truth, quieter than the others. Winter is not only weather, it is a method by which a society exposes what it values enough to protect. Look around long enough, and the pattern grows plain. Coal goes first to those who can purchase continuity. Privacy goes first to those with space. Rest goes first to those whose labour has been done for them by someone downstairs or down the street. Yet warmth, in a narrower, more human sense, does not obey the same map. It appears where there is almost none to spare, in a poor room around a weak grate, in a railway carriage between strangers, in a joke at a market stall, in a penny show before dawn, in a watchman lifting his lantern to a child behind glass, in a woman at a charity line, making room for another bowl, in a song hummed over mending, because singing costs less than coal. That is why the long night we have crossed should not close on grand conclusions. Victorian England did not solve itself by morning, and we should not pretend it did for the sake of tidy storytelling. Better instead to rest with the textures that remain, the brittle click of ice in a basin, the drag of a brush through soot, the muffled applause inside a theatre while snow thickens outside, the smell of chestnuts over a brazier, sweet for 3 seconds before smoke reclaims the air, the wet shine of cobbles under gaslight, the little rectangle of fire-coloured window in a street otherwise blue with cold, the rough wool sleeve held briefly above a kettle for warmth, the market woman's palm testing a loaf as if judging not bread but the whole day's chances. There is a form of historical closeness that comes not from dates but from bodily recognition. You know the relief of heat reaching numb fingers. You know the way a hard wind can turn every errand into a moral question. You know how darkness changes distances, and how a single light in the right place can seem to reorganize the entire world. This is why sleep history works so well when it works. It asks the modern body to meet the past, not first through argument, but through sensation. Once that meeting is made, the facts settle more deeply, and the empathy arrives without being dragged by force. Imagine, then, that the square begins to empty again, though perhaps it never truly did. Imagine the bench keeping the memory of your weight while you stand. Imagine turning once more through the city's gentler streets, not because there is more business to do, but because some nights are best ended in motion. The sun remains pale. It never manages brilliance, but it is enough to silver the railings and pick out the wet seams between cobbles. Postman knocks, a cook shakes crumbs from a cloth. Two maids laugh over something not worth recording, and therefore invaluable. Somewhere up above, behind a row of polished windows, someone still sleeps in sheets that were warmed for them by another pair of hands. Somewhere below, in the basement of the same house, those hands are rinsing a pot in water cold enough to sting. Past the church once more, where the morning service will soon gather those with coats respectable enough for pews. Past the station, where another train sends up steam like a dragon, too tired to threaten anyone. Past the river, now less magical than in the dark, but carrying under its grey skin the memory of fairs, barges, ice and thaw. Past the alley where children were huddled and find only a few black marks from last night's barrel fire. Past the workhouse gate, closed now, its brick face expressionless in day. Past the lane of the chimney sweeps, and see only ropes, ladders, and one boy scraping mud from a boot. Daylight has a way of making extraordinary hardship look procedural. This is one of its cruelties. It asks us to call routine what would feel unbearable if newly encountered. Still, routine is not nothing. Routine is how many souls lived. Up, fire, wash if possible, tea, if fortunate, walk, work. Endure, return, mend, stew, warm brick, sleep, repeat. For some, the cycle was softened by music, books, callers, servants, and thick curtains. For others, it was held together by little more than custom and stamina. Yet in both cases, the rhythm itself formed a kind of cradle. Not a comfortable one, but a cradle all the same. Bodies trust sequence. The heart slows when the day becomes predictable enough. Perhaps that is why we too, listening across years, grow calmer when a story understands recurring gestures. Coal in the scuttle, bowl on the table, boots at the hearth, lamp at the lane corner, curtain drawn, chair pulled close, breath visible, tea poured, door latched, snow falling again, and yes, it would begin again. That is another reason not to close the lid on the ending. Somewhere beyond this morning, another dusk is already preparing. Another room will cool. Another watchman will make his round. Another child will press cold fingers to warm brick. Another station will fill with steam and weary coats. Another chemist will recommend syrup with too much confidence. Another market will lay out vegetables that have seen better weather. Another parlour will gather its circle of cultivated ease, while downstairs the kitchen works in heat no one else must smell. Another moor will stand outside the city and receive the wandering thoughts of anyone lonely enough to walk there. Winter is repetition with variations. That is what makes it both oppressive and strangely fit for sleep. If, at some future hour, you find yourself under a modern blanket, hearing wind at their window, perhaps some part of this older city will return to you. Not the whole of it. Memory is more selective than that. Perhaps only a lamp in fog, or a hand around a cup, or the sight of frost making lace where no lace had been purchased, or the hum of a train carrying tired people through dark fields, or children laughing at monsters painted on a lantern slide. Such survivals of image are the hidden loop of stories like this. They ask to be revisited not because they end in triumph, but because they continue to glow after they are gone. And so, if you have walked far enough with me through these frozen streets and candlelit rooms, keep no sharp hold on the details now. Let them loosen. Let the city become less architectural and more atmospheric again. A roofline, a flue, a lane, a bowl, a shawl, a lantern, a bell, a bench, a fire that almost goes out, and then, with one small intervention, does not. That may be the gentlest emblem of all. By now the morning has settled fully enough that the city no longer needs introduction. It simply is. Smoke rises, wheels turn, doors open and close, somewhere supper, is already being imagined, though breakfast has only just been cleared. That is another winter habit worth honouring. The mind reaches for the next warmth before the current one is gone. There is wisdom in that, and perhaps a little sorrow too. But sorrow need not be allowed to be companionable. Some of the softest stories are made of nothing more than human beings preparing, again and again, for a cold they know will return. So let this final stretch remain loose at the edges. No last lecture, no polished moral, pinned like a label beneath the glass. Instead, walk a little farther down one side street, where the snow has begun to melt at the centre, but remains white along the walls. See a woman shake out a rug and pause to watch the steam from her own mouth. See a baker turn his sign and glance up at the sky with suspicion, measuring whether more weather is on the way. See a clerk step carefully around a patch of slush and fail, smiling despite himself as dirty water splashes the cuff. See a child, not yet called inside, draw a line in the thawing frost with one blunt finger, and then another, making a pattern for no audience at all. The world continues in these little unnecessary gestures. They are among its strongest. There are entire histories hidden in what people do to stay warm without discussing warmth. How they stand near a wall out of the wind. How they choose the sunny side of a street even in weak sun. How they tuck hands under arms while waiting. How they save the hottest potato for the walk. How they place chairs near, but not too near the range. How they pass a cup after one swallow, because someone else needs the heat more than the tea. These things seldom enter official archives with the dignity they deserve. Yet they are the texture of lived winter, and without them the past becomes all decree and oh breath. Perhaps that is the note on which to let the city recede. Hunched, not with closure, but with recognition. The people who moved through these winters were not waiting to become quaint. They were busy enduring, amusing, feeding, warning, warming, bending, travelling, scrubbing, entertaining, bargaining, healing, and beginning again. We have borrowed one night from them, and even that one night has been too large to hold entirely. Good. Let some of it remain beyond reach. Sleep comes more easily when not everything has been pinned down. The square behind you is quieter now. The bench cools. The bakery door opens once more and sends out that brief friendly gust that cannot possibly warm the whole street, and somehow makes the whole street feel less severe. A bell sounds from somewhere you cannot quite place. Snow slides in a soft sheet from one roof to another. From an upstairs window, someone draws the curtain half closed, not to shut the day out, but to soften it. It seems the right instinct. So, as the light spreads thinly over Victorian England, and the long winter walk loosens into memory, you may leave the city where it is, still breathing, still cold, still full of coal smoke, and candle glow, and ordinary endurance. Leave the lamps to dim on their own. Leave the market to its bargaining. Leave the trains to their iron rhythm. Leave the children to their patched boldness. The servants to their hidden labours. The watchman to the end of his shift. The chemist to his bottles. The river to its thaw. The moor to its distance. Leave the fire in that first small room with enough life left in it to last a little longer. And if, after all of this, the eyes grow heavier and the mind begins to drift, let it drift gently. There is no need to hold the street map in place, no need to keep count of lanes or windows or names. Let them blur as the fog did. Let the night become atmosphere again. Let the cold remain outside the blanket. Let the last image be simple. A modest room, a quiet grate, frost at the edge of the pane, and beyond it, a whole old country, breathing into winter, without ever fully running out of ways to endure.